Message this morning is entitled Friend for Life, and it's taken from the Old Testament book of 1 Samuel, chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. After David had finished talking with Saul, he met Jonathan, the king's son. There was an immediate bond between them, for Jonathan loved David. From that day on, Saul kept David with him and wouldn't let him return home. And Jonathan made a solemn pact with David because he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan sealed that pact by taking off his robe and giving it to David, together with his tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. Pictured above is Sharon. She checks her rearview mirror again. She studies the many faces of the other drivers that she sees again. She keeps an eye out because she knows that he'll come after her again. Nothing will keep me from you, was the message that Tony had left on her voicemail. I'm your husband. Well, the truth is, her ex-husband's fits of anger and rage and flying fists and black eyes had led her to their divorce. Still, he neglected all the warnings, ignored all of the restraining orders, and scoffed at the law. So Sharon checks the rearview mirror. Now, down the road, around the corner, there's an attorney, and his name is Adam. And Adam does some checking on his own. He peeks in the door of his boss's office, sees the empty chair, and sighs in relief. Because with any luck, Adam will have maybe an hour, perhaps two, before the managing partner appears in his doorway, likely hungover, angry, and disoriented. You see, Mouthpiece Jr. inherited the law firm from Mouthpiece Sr., but managing the firm apparently frustrates Jr. So he just reroutes his stress toward the employees that he needs the most. And like Adam, Junior rants and raves and gives tongue lashings daily and compliments Adam and the other staff's efforts about as frequently as you see Haley's Comet. So Sharon ducks her ex, Adam avoids his boss, and my question of you is, and what are you doing? What ogres roam your world? Maybe coaches from the school of Stalin, or the pit bull math teacher you have, or the self-appointed cubicle commandant? How about the king who resolves to spear the shepherd boy to the wall? Well, that last one, the one about the king and the murder weapon, comes after David. And you read the story and you think, wow, poor David. The Valley of Elah apparently proved to be his boot camp for the king's court. When Goliath lost his head, the Hebrews made David their national hero. People threw him a ticker tape parade and sang songs similar to, Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his tens of thousands. And you can find that in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 7. Well, if you are having a ticker tape parade throne for someone other than you if you're the king, what is your response? Well, for Saul, it was exploding like Mount Vesuvius. And Saul eyes David from that day forward. That's what 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 9 says. The king is already a very troubled soul. He's prone to very angry eruptions, and he's crazy enough to even eat bees. So David's popularity basically splashes gasoline on Saul's temper, and Saul just fumes, "I will pin David to the wall." 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 11. Saul tries to kill Bethlehem's golden boy on 6 different occasions. First, he invites David to marry his own daughter, Michal, which seems like a nice gesture until you read about the extremely crude dowry that Saul was required David before he would give Michal's hand in marriage to David. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 25 through 27, it said that Saul required 100 Philistine foreskins. That's a pretty significant dowry. And he's thinking, asking for that many deaths and accompanying trophies, I guess we'll call it, surely one of those Philistines will kill David. Well, they don't. And David, as we know from reading about David, decides to take it up a notch, and rather than bringing back just 100, he brings back 200 and gives Saul the proof. But Saul doesn't give up. He orders his servants and his son Jonathan to kill David, but they refuse. And you can find that in 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 1. He tries on his own with a spear another time, but he misses. 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 10. Saul then sends messengers to David's house to kill him, but this time his wife, Michal, Saul's own daughter, lowers David through the window to escape. David is like the roadrunner, staying one step ahead of Saul the coyote. Saul's anger puzzles David. He can't understand why Saul would be so angry. What has he done? He's brought musical healing to Saul's very tortured spirit, and he's brought hope to an enfeebled Hebrew nation. He's like the Abraham Lincoln of the Hebrew calamity, saving the republic and doing it with modesty and with honesty. In fact, 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 14 says that David behaved wisely in all of his ways. All Israel and Judah loved David. That's 2 verses later. David behaves more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name becomes highly esteemed. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 30. Yet Mount Saul just keeps erupting, rewarding David's deeds with flying spears and murderous plots. So it's not hard to understand David's question to Jonathan. In 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 1, we have David asking his friend Jonathan this question: what have I done? What is my crime? How have I offended your father that he is so determined to kill me?" But Jonathan does not have an answer to that question, because sometimes there just are no answers. Who can justify the rage of Saul? And then again, who knows why a father would torment a child, or a husband would abuse a wife, or a boss pit employees against other employees? Church, they do. That stuff happens. Saul's still rage on our planet. Dictators torture. Employers seduce. Ministers abuse. Priests molest. The strong and the mighty control and cajole the vulnerable and the innocent. Sauls in our lives still stalk the Davids in this world. That has not changed. So how does God respond to circumstances like that? Well, we'd like him to just nuke the nemesis, wouldn't we? Just blow him up. We'd like him to do that, since he's been known to extract from time to time a few Herods and Pharaohs from the world. So why won't he do that to our nemesis? So we ask, well, how is God going to treat our circumstances and our Sauls? And the answer is, I don't know. But how he will treat you, I can answer that question. He will send you a Jonathan. You see, in the story of Saul and David, God counters Saul's cruelty with Jonathan's loyalty. Now, Jonathan could have been as jealous of David as Saul was, because as Saul's son, Jonathan stood to inherit the throne. He had been a noble soldier himself, and the truth of the matter is he was fighting Philistines while David was still out in the fields feeding sheep. Jonathan had every reason in the world to despise David, but he didn't. Jonathan was gracious. Gracious because the hand of the master weaver took Jonathan's and David's hearts and stitched, apparently, a seam between them. And we know this from 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1, where it says, "The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul." It's as if these two hearts, coming from two completely different fabrics, had been needle and threaded together by God. So interwoven were these two kindred spirits and these two hearts that when one moved, the other felt it. When one was stretched, the other knew it. On the very day that David defeated Goliath, Jonathan pledges his loyalty to David. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because it says that Jonathan loved David as he loved his own soul. So as part of this pledge, Jonathan did the following. He took off his robe and he gave it to David, and gave him all of his armor and his sword and his bow and his belt. 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 3 and 4. Jonathan replaces David's rancher's overalls with his own purple robe, which would be the robe of a prince. He presents his own sword to David. He effectively crowns young David. The heir to the throne, Jonathan, surrenders his throne to his friend David. And then he protects David. When Jonathan hears the plots of his father Saul, he informs his new friend. When Saul comes after David, Jonathan hides him. He commonly issues warnings like this one from 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 2. My father seeks to kill you. Therefore, please be on your guard until morning and stay in a secret place and hide. Jonathan gives David a promise, a wardrobe and protection. And perhaps maybe that's why David's son Solomon writes in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. David had found such a friend in the son of Saul. Wouldn't you like to have a friend like Jonathan? Someone who would give you his garments, his protection, his encouragement, his honor? Wouldn't you like to have a soulmate, so to speak, who protects you, who seeks nothing but your own personal best interests, wants nothing other than just your happiness? An ally who just lets you be you? I mean, you feel safe with that person. You no need to weigh thoughts or measure words. You know his or her faithful hand will sift through the chaff and the grain and keep what matters, and with a breath of kindness, blow the rest away. God gave David such a friend in Jonathan. But church, he gave you one too. David found a companion in a prince of Israel. But you and I can find a friend in the King of Israel. His name is Jesus Christ. And hasn't he made a promise to you? Among Jesus' final words were these in Matthew chapter 28, verse 20. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And like Jonathan, hasn't Jesus clothed you as well? He offers you in Revelation chapter 3, verse 8, white garments that you may be clothed, that the shame of your nakedness may not be revealed. Christ fits you with clothing that is suitable for heaven. In fact, he outdoes Jonathan. He not only gives you his robe, but he puts on your rags. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21, God made him, referring to Jesus, who had no sin, to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. You see, church, Jesus dresses you. And like Jonathan, he equips you. You are invited in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11, to put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all the strategies and all of the tricks of the devil. From his armory, he hands you the belt of truth, the body armor of righteousness, the shield of faith, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Again, Ephesians chapter 6, this time verses 13 through 17. And just as Jonathan protected David, Jesus vows to protect you too. In John chapter 10, verse 28, he says, I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them away from me. Do you ever long for just one true friend? Well, you have one. And because you do, you have a choice. You can focus on your Saul if you want to, or you can focus on your Jonathan. You can ponder the malice of whatever monster stalks you through life, or you can ponder the kindness of Jesus Christ. Beverly, we'll call her Beverly, chose the latter, but it wasn't easy. Because how can you shift your focus away from the man who raped you? He entered Beverly's home under the guise of official business, and she had absolutely every reason to trust him. He was a personal acquaintance, and he was also a professional associate. He worked for the state, and so he asked to meet Beverly. But when he arrived, he took more than just Beverly's time. But when he was confronted about the act, he denied it. In fact, he did it so successfully, he thought that he had covered up the deed altogether. And as he continued to move up the political ladder, Beverly would spot him on the evening news. And while he feigned innocence, she was churning inside. But not like she used to, because a couple of years after the rape, she met her Jonathan. A friend had told her about Jesus, about his protection, about his provision, about his invitation. And fortunately, Beverly accepted it. And although memories of the rape are unavoidable, they don't control her anymore. She isn't left alone with her Saul any longer. She seeks Christ rather than revenge. She measures choices using the measure of mercy, not using the measure of her violator's cruelty. Beverly ponders and praises the living presence of Jesus, and doing so helps heal her soul. So you can major in your evil emperor. You can do that if you wish. You can paint horns on his picture. You can throw darts at her portrait. You can make and memorize a list of everything that spam brain took from you. Your childhood, your career, your marriage, your health. You can list it all. You can live a Saul-saturated life if you wish. You can wallow in the sludge of pain. And you'll feel better, won't you? Or will you? Because, church, if you linger in the stench of your hurt for too long, you'll start smelling like the toxin that you despise. Here's the better option. Hang out with your Jonathan. Bemoan your Sauls less and worship Christ more. Join with David as he announces in Psalm chapter 18, verses 46 through 49, "The Lord lives. Blessed be my rock. It is God who avenges me and subdues the people under me. He delivers me from my enemies. You have delivered me from the violent man, O God. Therefore I will give thanks to you, O Lord, and sing praises to your name forever." So this week, church, I encourage you to wander freely through the gallery of God's goodness. Catalog God's kindnesses. Everything from sunsets to salvation. Look at what you have. Your soul and your Saul may have suffered and taken a lot. But the truth of the matter is, Christ gave you more. Let Jesus be the friend you need. Talk to him. Don't spare any details. Let Jesus be that friend that you need. Disclose your fears and describe your dreads. Will your Saul disappear? I don't know. Maybe. But in a sense, does that really matter? Because in Jesus, you found a friend for life. And what could be better than that? Jesus, the friend of sinners, just like you and just like me. The Apostle Paul said that he was the chief of sinners. And he had a good reason to say that, because before he became Paul, the apostle, he was Saul from a city called Tarsus, whose mission in life was to kill Christians. And so Paul, reflecting on his life, could give himself that label that he was the chief of sinners. And that he said, despite that, God still loves me. And church, there is nothing you have ever done that can separate you from God's love, with one exception: if you choose to remain separated. You see, God doesn't move. God sent his son Jesus Christ to die for you and to die for me, so that through him we might have life eternally. But it's an invitation. In fact, in Revelation it talks about Jesus standing at the door and knocking. He doesn't come barging in with a battering ram. You need to accept me. He's just knocking and inviting. And with a friend like Jesus Christ, why wouldn't you accept that invitation? Why would you spend all of your life wallowing and fighting the Sauls in your world when you have Jesus Christ, who is willing to come alongside you and give you his grace and his mercy and his love abundantly? Why wouldn't you accept that invitation? And better yet, why wouldn't you share that with others whom you know? We live in a world that is struggling for answers. We think we've found it. We can either be more woke, or we can fail to define the word woman, or we can wonder why Putin is doing what he's doing in the Ukraine. I don't have answers for those questions, But we do have one constant in our life as Christians, and that is God's Word. And He is the same God yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That's who you came to worship today. Why wouldn't you invite others to join you and do the same? So this week, think less of your Sauls and more of your Jonathan, and see if that doesn't change your outlook on life.